We're not going to let this story die because they have gotten mileage out of the work that they've done. And of course, I'm talking about the SPLC. Charlottesville turned into a fundraising bonanza for them. They doubled their revenue and cemented their power with big tech and corporate America. Now, federal prosecutors say millions were quietly funneled to racists behind the scenes. Imagine that. We're connecting the dots they don't want you to see, and we're doing it coming up on 1819 News, the podcast. We have an incredible culture here in the state of Alabama, but our politics and public policy don't reflect the people of Alabama. Media drives culture. Culture is what drives politics and public policy. Welcome, everyone, to 1819 News, the podcast. Bryan Dawson, CEO of 1819 News and host of this here podcast, where we're in pursuit of a free and flourishing Alabama every single week. And one of the arch nemesis, nemeses, I don't know, I'm not good at plural fancy words, but a huge pain in our rear ends here in the state of Alabama that is also a huge pain in the rear ends of so many people across the country is this little place you may have heard of called the Southern Poverty Law Center. Did a podcast last week about that with the great Chad O. Jackson, and we dove into the history of the SPLC and agitprop and the role that they played in kind of furthering the communist Bolshevik, whatever that is, the civil rights movement. And that was a really interesting episode. But when the SPLC got indicted, one of the things that was problematic is like the redistricting happened. There was the attempted, shooting or assassination that happened at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And then all of a sudden the SPLC stuff just kind of got out of the news cycle. And I don't want to let that happen. I think we need to keep the hammer down on these guys. We need to keep the pedal to the metal. We need to continue exposing them and putting pressure on whoever can dig in and get some type of an actual good legal outcome on this that would, Lord willing, shut down the SPLC for good. And but before I dive in and introduce my guests, I want to tell you guys, as I always do, the dance, Trump has a dance. Mine is like, subscribe, comment, and share. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. Everyone wants to know, hey, how can I help? I said, well, we're a nonprofit, so you can write a big fat check or small check or any check. That's always good. But the other way that you can help specifically with this podcast is like, subscribe, comment, and share. And if you do that, that helps get our message out. I'm constantly told, man, you have such an incredible podcast. How do you not have a massive audience? I'm just glad someone else thinks that other than me. It's always weird when you're thinking that yourself. It's like, man, I am so good at this. Why is no one listening? Obviously, more than no one is listening. We've got a substantial audience for being an Alabama-based podcast, but I believe it needs to be bigger. So please like, subscribe, comment, and share, and do that. And this week, I'm going to be bringing on a couple friends to talk more in depth about the SPLC from a legal angle and institutional angle and what needs to be done. And I'm bringing on my good friend Alan Mendenhall, an Alabama native as well, and his friend at Heritage and the Daily Signal, Tyler O'Neill, an investigative journalist there. And so real quick, before we jump in, Alan, if you want to just introduce yourself, who you are, what do you do, and then Tyler do the same.
Yeah, sure. So I am a senior advisor in our free enterprise initiative at the Heritage Foundation. We work on shareholder engagement, which includes shareholder engagement involving this SPLC issue, by the way. And then I am a research fellow in the Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies, but I live in Auburn, Alabama. I was formerly associate dean of the business school at Troy University and executive director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy over at Troy. Before that, I was associate dean of the law school at Faulkner University. Before that, I was an assistant attorney general in Luther Strange office and the AG's office there. And then before that, I was a staff attorney for Chief Justice Roy Moore. So I've been around Alabama for quite some time and have been in politics here for quite some time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alan. Tyler, brief intro to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. I'm Tyler O'Neill. I'm senior investigative reporter at the Daily Signal. I also wrote the book, Making Hate Pay, The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I wrote that way back in 2020. when I saw that the SPLC was a nefarious force on the left that I describe as the tip of the spear when it comes to demonizing conservative and Christian organizations across America. And so the SPLC back in 2019 was demonizing mainstream conservative and Christian groups by putting them on a map with Klan chapters and telling big tech, corporate America, everyone who would listen, that these groups are a threat to civil society, that they need to be deplatformed, debanked, demonetized, cut down to size in any way possible, and really excised from polite society. And, you know, at the same time, the SPLC was pushing critical race theory through its teaching tolerance program. Now it has gotten too woke for tolerance, so they decided to nix that name and go with learning for justice. But the SPLC was the worst of the worst when I wrote the book in 2020, and it's only gotten worse since then.
Wow. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for the introduction, and I'm very excited about this conversation, specifically because there's been very few organizations, I think maybe other than USAID, who's done more to damage our country, to do more to damage, I don't know if founding stock is the right word, heritage Americans, just people who want to go to church and raise their children and just be left alone. No one's done more to harm just normal Americans than this organization. And what you just said, Tyler, reminds me of something I say on my podcast often, is that when you're labeled a fascist, it's not because they are looking at your economic philosophy or any of these other things. The point of labeling you a fascist is so that they can kill you, right? And so, and they label you a fascist if you're effective in resisting the long march through the institutions, if you're effective at resisting what groups like the SPLC and ADL and all these other organizations are trying to do to our country. If you're effective in resisting that, you're labeled a fascist, and the point of labeling you a fascist is so that they can kill you. And so really that seems to be the point. And it seems like the SPLC, they didn't label you a fascist, they just put you on a hate map. So just replace fascist with hate. And they're just like, oh yeah, he's a whatever, he's on the hate map, he's on the hate list. And then you have the Family Research Council a number of years ago have some guy storm in there with a pistol, and thank God someone, took him out before he was able to unload a clip on a whole bunch of people there. And the Family Research Council is just a normal Christian organization, trying to affect change in DC like so many other organizations. And because they were labeled a hate group, someone ran in there with a pistol and basically said, well, yeah, I went in there to kill everybody because it said that because of their stance on homosexuality and gay marriage. And so it seems like they are they're not trying, and it doesn't seem, I don't know why I use language like that. It seems like they're trying. No, they are taking good people who are trying to preserve our civilization and way of life and putting a label on them so that anything from debanking and demonetization to unaliving and killing people all seems to be up for grabs, and they're fine with any of those things.
Yeah, I think the main issue here, the label, is white supremacist. Mm-hmm. So if you look at, they say this over and over again, that their hate map reveals the infrastructure upholding white supremacy in the United States. And of course, when they went after Turning Point USA and put them on the hate map, they said that Turning Point USA was fighting to protect white Christian supremacy. So what they do is they're taking Christian and they're using so the SPLC gained their reputation. They weren't founded for this, by the way. I mean, this is an important distinction, I think, that often gets overlooked. They weren't founded to sue the Klan into bankruptcy. They were founded to represent poor people in the South, to give them legal representation. And that's why in 1985, all the legal team actually quit because they said, look, Morris Dees, who's the co-founder, he was taking the organization in a focus of going after the Klan and pretty much only going after the Klan. And that did really well for donors, but the lawyers, the do-good lawyers at the SPLC had a problem with somebody spending all their time going after white supremacist groups that barely existed at the time. And that was when they were going after the Klan, which is, legitimate, evil, white supremacist. Eventually, they ran out of grand dragons to slay, and they started putting ever more mainstream groups on their hate map, trading off of their history of suing the Klan into bankruptcy to smear mainstream conservatives. So that's why I emphasize that infrastructure upholding white supremacy language. I think that's very important because when the SPLC puts you on a map with Klan chapters, they are telegraphing that you are spreading the exact same form of hate as America's most notorious hate group. And America's most notorious hate group is the Ku Klux Klan, which engaged in terrorism for decades, and which America rightly now hates and says, like, if anybody is anything like the Klan, we want to ostracize them from polite society. That's why I always say the SPLC engages in routine defamation, because what they're doing when they put you on the hate map is they're comparing you to the worst hate group in history. And that's one of the reasons also why I don't like it when people go around and say the SPLC is itself a hate group, because I think hate group means something when the SPLC uses it. And yes, the SPLC is encouraging hate against conservatives, but they don't do what the Klan did, and they don't do what they're telegraphing people on the right are doing. And so I think it's very important that we hold them to that standard of saying, like, look, you're saying these people are hate groups and putting them on a map with Klan chapters. That means something, and you should be held liable for it in court.
Do you think demonetizing people so they can't feed their family and having them get shot in the throat in front of all those people, like the way Charlie did, I think that's as bad as the Klan personally?
So the SPLC, and here's one of the main reasons why I think there's still a difference. They've consistently condemned. So, of course, they come out and say they condemn the assassination of Charlie Kirk. They condemn the FRC shooting. There's a difference between doing that and then actually putting their money where their mouth is by removing these groups from their hate map. I think it is beyond the pale that Turning Point USA is still on the hate map after that assassination, that the Family Research Council is still on the hate map. I mean, it is disgusting beyond belief. But I still don't think that the SPLC is like the KKK. But,
Got it.
We're fine to have that discussion.
Yeah. No, not why I brought you guys on. Well, maybe we'll save that one for some cigars some other time. I'll bring Chad O. Jackson on, and it'll be great. So anyway, Alan, I want you to chime in, kind of describe what you've seen. Tell me about what was this indictment about, what happened, and what can be done in Alabama about it.
Yeah, sure. So interestingly enough, I was not surprised by the story that the Southern Poverty Law Center was reproducing the conditions necessary for its own moral legitimacy. And here's why I say that is at the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, I was working at the Alabama Supreme Court, and I walked down to Dexter Avenue and saw the marchers, and it was an emotional experience. It was very interesting, profound. It was a special time to be part of history. And then I saw this man wearing a costume, an outfit with badges and insignia on it. I didn't quite understand what all the symbols meant, but I could tell that it was a Klan adjacent outfit. And he was surrounded by all these photographers taking pictures of him. And I was standing near this African-American woman who was saying something to the effect of, that guy's he's just hired by the SPLC to sit there. I actually told Tyler this story when he was preparing for his book, when he was doing interviews for his book. Now, can I confirm what the lady said was true? No, I can't. Do I even know who this lady is? I have no idea. But it set something in my mind, and I always thought, that's kind of interesting. It actually makes sense because, if hate is your business model and we just don't have the spread of hate, like the Klan is minuscule now. It does not have anywhere near the power that it once had, say, in the early 20th century. And if all these hate groups, or whatever you want to call them, all these white supremacist groups, things like the Klan or neo-Nazis or whatever they are, if they're on the wane, then how could the Southern Poverty Law Center be growing? Like, in order to hunt the monster, it has to feed the monster. It became a parasite on the very pathology it claimed to cure. So it had to actually create the impression that these groups were spreading when in fact they weren't. At least that's how the allegations run, and that's what I believe to be sincerely true. So we have this federal indictment that took place in April, and there are 11 counts. There are 6 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of false statements to a bank, a count of money laundering conspiracy. And that's great. I'm glad that we have the DOJ looking into this. There's something like over $3 million in donor money at stake. But it's really interesting to see, like, the bank fraud claims. I hear people saying, well, there's no smoking gun. There's no smoking gun. The people that are defending the SPLC. I'm like, well, do you know how an investigation occurs? Like, of course there's no smoking gun. You've got to investigate. And this is just the very beginning. There's enough there for an indictment to have taken place. And so this is still a very much an ongoing situation, but the allegations say that the SPLC opened up fake accounts under fake business names like Fox Photography. Well, if I'm not mistaken, there was like a Fox Photos or something, a real company when I was a kid. And so it's a company that doesn't exist now, but it sounds kind of like a real company. Rare Books Warehouse, Northwest Technologies. These are names that sound like they could be legit, but what they were really doing is they were fronts to make payments to groups like the Klan or neo-Nazis, and that's why we're getting these sort of investigations on fraud. Now, I argued that this should be front and center of our Attorney General race, which, as we sit here today, the primary is tomorrow, so I don't know when this runs, but it may not run tomorrow.
The day after.
The day after. So by the time this hits, the primary will have taken place. But I am very happy to see that Steve Marshall has launched an investigation of the SPLC under the Alabama Deceptive Trade Practices Act, under Alabama charitable organization laws. And there are lots of different implications for this. They could be civil penalties, which are kind of minor, $2,000 per violation, but you could lose your entire charitable registration. So Alabama's Attorney General can suspend or revoke the SPLC's charitable registration, which would be a big deal. Also, all the things you would expect, refunding donors, paying damages, paying attorney's fees. Alabama actually has treble damages in some situations, depending on what could be proved. And there could be some criminal exposure here if we see intentional fraud or embezzlement. We don't have a state-based RICO equivalent, but we've got these other crimes. And there's even the possibility for personal liability for the officers and directors. And so we're going to just wait and see what gets uncovered. But I think it's very important that the state attorney general bring this investigation against the SPLC, because there are different angles and potentially different crimes or civil penalties at stake through state law that aren't at issue here in federal law.
Yeah, when you're talking about a smoking gun, I think there is no better smoking gun than those direct statements they have to the bank. I mean, you have statements from SPLC employees saying, I certify I am the owner and proprietor of this establishment. And they have quotes, I X person certify I am the owner. And then a few years later, the SPLC CEO, who we know is Margaret Wong, writes another letter to the bank saying, oh yeah, these accounts were opened on behalf of the Southern Poverty Law Center and operated on behalf of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So if you ask me, it looks like that indictment has it in black and white that they lied to this bank. Now, I've heard the statute they cited in question requires an intent threshold. We'll have to see. I suspect that we might be seeing a superseding indictment that names specific individuals and not just the organization. That all, has to come out. The DOJ can make moves like that. One of my favorite things is that they just inked the date for the trial in this case. And that is none other than my birthday. So I'm sitting back here saying, wow. Now, of course, there's the chance that they actually have the trial on that day is unlikely. But it's still one of those things you couldn't make up. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, and just thinking about the history of the SPLC, as you mentioned, they were originally stood up to, provide legal defense for people who couldn't afford it in the South. I kind of get the gut feeling this whole thing was a communist organization from the start. But they did, like you said, in the 80s had the entire walkout of their legal staff as they moved towards white supremacy and hate groups and all that. And then there's it's just an interesting thing to be able to have like an $800 million endowment and $190 million in annual revenue. And to be able to keep that thing up and running, you have to create the hate that you've been selling everybody that exists that needs to be fought. It's bizarre. And, the nonprofit realm, I run a nonprofit. This is a nonprofit, 1819 News is. So I'm aware of the pitfalls that can happen, in this realm of, different incentives and all these other things. But, this is, to me, it's just a whole new level to be funneling money to organizations to pretend to be or amplify the appearance of, I call it astroturf racism, but specifically getting into Charlottesville. And think about how much mileage the left and the mainstream media got off of Charlottesville. And of course, and I make the joke that Alex Jones came out, and this was prior to Alex Jones going on Tucker Carlson, where Tucker kind of made Alex Jones a little bit more legitimate, like said, well, I mean, he got this right. And now you're actually hearing Alex Jones talking into a lot of issues where everyone else thought he was a kook and crazy. But prior to that happening, he was like, the SPLC's funding this, the SPLC funded Charlottesville. But he was right. It's absolutely crazy. And even when I heard Alex Jones say that the SPLC was funding Charlottesville, I'm like, it's a bit of a stretch. It's a bit of a stretch, but no, it's actually true. Tyler, talk about just kind of your overall thoughts on, them astroturfing racism.
Yeah, so I really appreciate Alan's anecdote, but I also think that, all the incentives line up for them to prop up these things. And Charlottesville really is Exhibit A. Like, if you look through all of the field sources that are mentioned in the indictment, the clearest example of somebody who, and by the way, the SPLC, they didn't deny that they sent $3 million to members of the Klan and members of the Aryan nations and these people. They just said, this is part of our informant program. And, if you ask me, back in the 1980s, maybe in the 1990s, it made sense for them maybe to have an informant program. Their offices were firebombed in 1983. I could see you wanting to be tipped off if there's going to be any violence, if your office has been firebombed. But the actions in this indictment are from 2014 to 2023. Last time I checked, there hasn't been much in the way of violence from these groups during that period. Now, the SPLC says they have two examples where people that they say they were monitoring in this program were then later charged with federal charges. And we have to see how all that works out. But when we're looking at Charlottesville, we have a person who didn't tip off the SPLC to violence and lead to the prevention of violence. If you were funding an informant and you knew that Charlottesville was going to happen, and you actually wanted for there not to be violence, you would do the opposite of what the SPLC is alleged to have done. The SPLC is alleged here to have fed their so-called informant, really he's a field source, talking points in his racist messaging. They helped him, according to the indictment suggests, they helped him bring more people to Charlottesville and make Charlottesville a bigger thing than it otherwise would have been. And that's huge, because if all of this is true, and of course that's an if, but it's pledged in an indictment and the federal grand jury thought it was true enough that they would agree to these charges. If this is true, then the SPLC effectively invested in Charlottesville. And if they invested in Charlottesville, it gave them crazy returns. Because if you look at their 990, for the years before, they were raising about $50 million a year. That's a lot. But after Charlottesville, that goes up to north of 100. Yep. And right after Charlottesville, They get $1 million pledges from JP Morgan Chase and from Apple CEO Tim Cook. They also get the hate map plastered all over CNN, and they get social media companies lining up and making pledges to fight hate by citing the Southern Poverty Law Center. So Charlottesville was nothing less than a bonanza for the SPLC, and if they were investing in it, that is a massive scandal. Whether they're convicted of these charges or not, this is going to dog them for the foreseeable future, and we should always remember it, because as you noted, the left made hay of Charlottesville. Biden said he ran for president because of Charlottesville. They falsely accused Trump of saying that there were very fine people among the white supremacists in Charlottesville. This was a talking point the left continued to use over and over and over, and they need to be hoist on their petard for this, because over and over the SPLC and the left in general have been demonizing good people who want to stand for American values and condemning them, putting them on a map, trying to cut them off from polite society. And it has to stop. And that's why, whatever happens with this indictment, it is good to see the SPLC finally have to answer some serious questions about the way that they've been propping up the very hate that they claim to oppose.
If you're running a ministry or you own a business, my guess is that you've been thinking about starting a podcast for a while now, but for various reasons it hasn't happened yet. Send me an email. I need to personally connect you with Yonder Child Media. They built this studio in 2 days and tackle all of the production. I just come in, start talking, and leave. It's that easy. They do everything else. Whether you want to record at your business or a home office like they just built for me, you come in, start talking, and Yonder Child will do everything else. Send me an email. That's going to be Bryan, Bryan.Dawson, Dawson, at 1819news.com, and I'd be happy to personally connect you. I've got a vision in my mind where the SPLC goes out of business and we move 1819 headquarters into the Poverty Palace. Is this going to be possible, Alan? I need your legal analysis. Are they going down so that I can take over the Poverty Palace? I need to know.
You got to get on the hate map first.
Yes, I've been trying. I don't know what I got to do. I mean, I'm getting all the death threats, and I've been going out there with TPUSA. I mean, I don't know what I got to do. I told my viewers, subscribers, and donors, I'm like, I will try harder, guys. I don't know. I feel like I failed you.
I want to say one thing, Brian, in response to, it says Tyler mentioned the social media companies, and I want to just throw this out there because we as in Heritage Foundation, multiple companies that were using the Southern Poverty Law Center's diagnostic tools, including its hate map, and 3 of those companies we withdrew the proposals from because they basically said, we don't want to use the SPLC. We think the SPLC is toxic now. Well, one of those was Meta. And I don't want to say too much about the behind the scenes talk because we have a good rapport with the C-suite executives there. We've built up a great relationship, and we want to keep working with them to make sure their company continues to improve. But what I will say is Meta was a prime example of a company that said, we don't want to be using the SPLC. We don't want to touch it. If we're using it, tell us how so that we can stop. And they, in fact, were using a company called Benevity to do screening of their charitable gifts. So, for example, if you were an employee and you wanted to give to Family Research Council or Moms for Liberty or TPUSA, you wouldn't get an employee match through the company because Benevity would screen those companies out, those firms, those nonprofits out based on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. Well, when we pointed that out to Meta and to Salesforce and MasterCard, they all 3 said, we don't want any part of that. We'll stop doing this. And thanks for letting us know, basically. And we engaged those companies actually just shortly after Charlie Kirk's assassination because TPUSA had been targeted by the SPLC just a couple of months before Charlie Kirk's assassination. But I bring that up to suggest that there is some hope for momentum, that companies are starting to wake up to this reality. We have asset management firms that are also screening the SPLC out, saying, look, we're not going to right now be your platform for giving to the Southern Poverty Law Center. We're cutting off that pipeline right now. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is getting a little bit of a taste of its own medicine. I think it needs to get a lot more of the taste of its own medicine. And just because we've had successes with those three companies I mentioned doesn't mean that there's still problems. Amazon and Starbucks both dug their feet in, and Starbucks in particular really was like, well, we're not touching this SPLC. This was before they had their annual meeting, before the indictment came down. So maybe there would have been a different situation had the indictment been in place. But, companies like Amazon and Starbucks are still doing really bad things. And those are two companies where we had very poor engagements, very unprofessional engagements, in my opinion, with the executives we met with.
How much of that do you think is the positive, like from Meta and these others? How much do you think was telegraphed by the SPLC? Like, as a, for instance, and this will probably be a Tyler question, Michael Edison Hayden, who was one of the SPLC's most prominent investigative journalists, was fired in 2023 and has now written about the change in the SPLC. He joined in 2019. It seems to me, and I don't know as much about this stuff as you guys, it seems to me like the SPLC understood that this was coming, okay? And they were trying to make moves where they could, hang this guy, this Hayden guy, and these investigative journalists and that whole department that they seem to have done away with. And this is the group that used to go do all of the investigating and labeling and the hate mapping and everything that they were using. They fired them, and it almost seems like they're going to leave them out to dry and point to them and try and blame them. I don't know if that's a good read or not, but it seems like the SPLC, the writing was on the wall that this day was coming. Maybe these corporations sensed that and moved away, and then the SPLC also seemed to kind of know it was coming in firing this entire investigative department and moving away from some of this stuff. What are your thoughts, Tyler?
I'm not sure I trust Michael Edison Hayden entirely.
Yeah, I don't either.
On that. I think look, Michael Edison Hayden, his biggest beef with the SPLC is that they're not aggressive enough in going after MAGA. And when I hear him say that, I'm like, all right, well, you have another thing coming, because if I've been following this for years and they just added Turning Point USA to the hate map, I think they're plenty aggressive when it comes to going after MAGA. Now, maybe, what Michael Edison Hayden wants is more of a granular investigation. He probably is looking at a group like GPAHE, the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, which, by the way, Heidi Bayrick, who used to run the hate map for the SPLC, is now over there. She essentially created that with another SPLC staffer called Wendy Villa. I think that organization is for people who are so radical that they're too far for the SPLC even. So we do need to be paying attention. Global Project Against Hate and Extremism is cited by Anthropic as one of their go-to engines for combating hate. So I think it is important for us to continue on this. Even if the SPLC goes the way of the dodo, their strategy is not going to be eradicated unless they're really held accountable for it. And I think that, I think that is one of the big takeaways. The other thing about Michael Edison Hayden, though, and this I do find credible, is he talked about the union busting that has been happening at the SPLC. So, hold on to your boots for this one, because this is insane. The Southern Poverty Law Center had a racial discrimination and sexual harassment scandal in 2019, by the way, based on allegations that had been reported for decades before against the co-founder Morris Dees, who was then fired, and the president, Richard Cohen, stepped down. And then, of course, the Secretary of State in Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, who is now running for governor, decided that the SPLC was too radioactive for her to stay on the board. So she left. But all of that scandal was not enough for the SPLC employees, who thought there hadn't been enough justice done at the SPLC to root out some of this corruption. So what did they do? They formed a union. Now, theoretically, when you join to work at a nonprofit, you join up because you want to advance the mission more than you want to make a buck. But the SPLC has an in-house union that creates a natural adversity between labor and management, which automatically produces even more problems when you're a nonprofit. So the SPLC, according to Michael Edison Hayden, the SPLC brought in a lawyer who was known for going after unions and being aggressive against unions. And then Michael Edison Hayden joins the union, becomes a steward of the union, and starts to find himself on the negative end, on the business end of management at the SPLC. Couldn't happen to a better person, But Michael Edison Hayden is dragged through what he describes as Kafkaesque proceedings, where he is falsely accused, according to his version of events, of saying things that he never actually said. And then ultimately he gets fired. Now, why does he get fired? And this is where the scandal just continues to build on itself, because the SPLC presents itself as the biggest force combating hate in America today. But when October 7th happened, the SPLC was crickets. Now, this is the invasion of Hamas into Israel, where they grabbed women, children, young people. They killed these people. They raped people. They engaged in unspeakable things, and then they left. And they took hostages, of course, we finally got all the hostages released under Trump. But, that's years of these Israelis being held hostage. This horrible attack leads to many instances of anti-Semitism across the globe, and in the United States in particular. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which is supposedly the best force combating hate that we have in the United States, decides not to say anything about October 7th, waits until near the end of October, makes it so that the SPLC employees are so frustrated that the union itself comes out with a statement before the SPLC does. And of course, that statement is a problem in itself. But the SPLC finally comes out with a statement around October 30th. And when they do so, they condemn Israel for targeting civilians. They falsely accuse Israel of targeting civilians. And then when I call them out on this online, they suddenly delete the passage from their statement. But amid all of this, the SPLC's union decides to issue their own statement, and they condemn Israel's response to Gaza as the beginnings of a genocide in Gaza. Later on, Michael Edison Hayden signs an open letter calling Israel an apartheid state. And so what he describes, and then he gets punished for it. This story could not get any more crazy, though, because he gets punished, but his Jewish co-worker, Hannah Guy, she has Jewish heritage. He has Palestinian heritage. He's from, he traces his ancestry back to Egypt, and then through his mother, and then his mother's ancestors lived in Israel and identify as Palestinian. So he says the SPLC engaged in racial discrimination by going against him and then not going against Hannah Guy. And ultimately, he starts the process of suing them, and they end up settling. So in Michael Edison Hayden's words, which the SPLC has not come out with a statement against it. And by the way, this all shocks me because the SPLC is usually very good about getting non-disparagement agreements, non-disclosure agreements whenever they agree to things. So somehow Michael Edison Hayden got his settlement without a non-disclosure agreement, which is, that's huge. Or maybe the SPLC doesn't think it's worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze to sue him. Who knows? Ultimately, what happened here is you have somebody from inside the SPLC revealing not only do they have racial discrimination, sexual harassment, union busting, internal divisions when it comes to Israel and combating anti-Semitism. But this organization really has, I say, they have a Mad Libs of scandal. There is not a single type of scandal that the SPLC is not somehow accused of. And we have good evidence that they really were engaging in it.
Wow. That's insane. But again, it doesn't, it's not a big surprise that corrupt people are doing corrupt things. And I'm glad that now it seems the hood seems to be open and people are looking in, and you're seeing all the kind of cockroaches go scattering in a million different directions. And, with Hayden getting fired, it couldn't have happened to a better person. But another question I want to ask you guys, it's really something that I found interesting as, I've been I'm not like super glued into the SPLC, just other than knowing that they're in Montgomery, which is like 15 minutes from my house, and that they suck and that I don't like them. Like that's about as deep as I got until this indictment happened. But as I've been looking at things, I also saw the SPLC, prior to Meta, waking up to how horrible and radioactive they were, all these massive Fortune 500 companies and even companies that are just big that weren't Fortune 500 companies, they were teaching them basically how to write DEI into their HR codes and everything, and essentially implement DEI in these huge corporations. And just think of all the people that who are working at some dead end job, in some cubicle somewhere, this just life-sucking, existence, and they're just getting DEI stuff hammered down on them, and that the SPLC actually helped create this situation in the corporate world. What do you think of that, Alan?
Yeah, Brian, these people are evil, but they're not idiots. And so they tried to capture all kinds of institutions, not just corporate America, but they knew where the centers of power were. So they were trying to get training materials into police departments, into law enforcement, into military, into everything that basically is a center of control in society, trying to get them on the media. You would see CNN was always, I would always roll my eyes when CNN would say, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, I'm like, are you seriously? You take these people seriously? How could you consider yourself a mainstream flagship news channel and actually cite the SPLC? That'd be like me citing some absurd thing. But they were trying to gain power. And how does power operate? It circulates through the discourse of our controlling institutions, and that would be government, media, and corporate America. And so the left has gone through this in schools, exactly, the long march through the institutions for a long time. But the Southern Poverty Law Center was really a leader in that long march.
Yep, I completely agree. Tyler, is there anything else you were wanting to say on this thing before we wrap it up? I know you seem fully charged and full of information, and I don't want to not ask the question that's going to let you go on another tear. So just whatever tear that you have loaded, just let it loose.
Well, I've been writing my testimony. So actually, this is going to come out on the same day that I testify before the House Judiciary Committee on the Southern Poverty Law Center. And my problem is I have a 5-minute segment to deliver my oral testimony. And I'm like, how do I summarize what I want to say in 5 minutes? It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
But one of the things we haven't touched on, and I think we should touch on, and I promise I won't go too long on this.
Go for it.
But the Biden administration really sidled up to the SPLC in so many different ways. You had the SPLC was cited in that notorious anti-Catholic memo from the FBI. The SPLC was advising DOJ prosecutors on the anti-LGBTQ movement. And by the way, for those who don't understand how horrible that is, the SPLC was long condemned as anti-Christian because of what they did to groups like the Family Research Council and Alliance Defending Freedom. And the SPLC for a long time said, no, we're not anti-Christian because we don't just go after people for upholding biblical morality. We go after you because you systematically demonize LGBTQ people. Then, the only piece of evidence they ever gave for that claim was that they decided not to put Focus on the Family on the hate map. And of course, for those who know, Focus on the Family is really the #1 conservative Christian nonprofit going back for decades. Almost nobody has the footprint that Focus on the Family has. And the SPLC drew a line and said, look, we're not anti-Christian. We don't put Focus on the Family on the hate map. Then suddenly, they take that language defending themselves from being anti-Christian and throw it down the memory hole And then they put focus on the family on the hate map. And they have, as the person to defend putting focus on the family on the hate map, is this man by the name of R.G. Cravens. Now, this guy's very interesting because when he defends putting focus on the family on the hate map, R.G. Cravens says that it is both false and dangerous to perpetuate political notions that you can't be truly Christian if you are LGBTQ+. Now, I don't know about you. If you've studied the very first beginnings of Christian history and Christian theology and Christian doctrine, if you've looked at the Bible, and I'm talking to two guys in Alabama, so I'm sure you guys are very well familiar with this. Every Christian denomination until about 5 minutes ago said, as the Bible clearly says, that marriage is between one man and one woman, that outside of that, sexual activity is not allowed, and that, cross-dressing is clearly forbidden in the Bible. The idea of a transgender identity is something that nobody would have taken seriously, and which we all believe as Christians is incompatible with God's design for men and women. And yet, R.G. Cravens is not only flatly stating that traditional Christian doctrine is false, but he's also calling it dangerous. This R.G. Cravens is the very same person who was brought in under the Biden administration to train prosecutors about the anti-LGBTQ movement. So this demonization of Christian doctrine by saying that it is a violent threat to LGBT people, this is something that was taught to prosecutors in the Biden administration. That's how far this rot goes.
Wow, man, there's so much, and that just seems to know no bounds, and specifically, intersectionality is built, around, trying to tear down, so I guess when we look at intersectionality and they have the white Christian male is like the epitome of evil, right? The face of Satan in their worldview. And my belief of the reason for that is that they're coming after what they would call white Christian hegemony. It's like, okay, whatever. At the end of the day, we are a Western European Christian nation. We are a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nation. That is our heritage. Those are our roots. That is who founded our country. It was our Christian views and our Christian ideals. And so by them targeting faithful, real Christianity and trying to overthrow Christianity, and that's what, to me, the entire Marxist, Bolshevik, communist, insert the ism, secularism, atheism, any of the isms, the whole point of it is to dethrone Christ from, the throne of a Christian nation, the Christian West, Christendom, where Christ has dominion. That is what they have been trying to do. And so it doesn't surprise me to hear that they're taking like focus on the family, the most plain vanilla, basic, Christianity that at that size and that, in Colorado Springs there and that incredible organization, that they're labeling them hateful. And I mean, look at James Dobson. It's like Ned Flanders, okay? Like from The Simpsons. Like this guy's obviously not a terrorist. He's just insane. So, yeah. Well, man, Alan, do you have any last thoughts?
Well, I'll just, because you brought it up, I'll say that I think humans are somewhat wired to seek religion, to seek the transcendental. And if they aren't religious, they will try to fulfill that natural instinct through other forms. So what you are describing in terms of intersectionality is something like original sin or innate human depravity, the notion that certain people are born corrupted or flawed, but this is a secularized version of a Christian doctrine. You know what I mean? And so people are using, they are using this sort of race, gender, class, prism, whatever you have, sexuality, as a form of religious expression. And so that's why you have so many people on the left that are just so adamant, so militant, because they are wedded to these ideas of leftism the way that a zealous person would be toward religion. And unfortunately, these leftist secular ideas have no room for grace. They have no room for justification. They have no room for sanctification. And so all the softening, all the humanizing, all the sympathetic elements of Christianity are absent from them. And so they pursue their goals with hatred and relentlessly.
It's interesting that they are the most hateful people ever, yet they created the hate map to talk about other people that are hateful. It's bizarre. Can one of you guys, is Antifa on the hate list at least? Because they at least have a little bit of balance? Something tells me it's probably not.
Nope. No Antifa, no Jane's Revenge. In fact, the SPLC arguably has ties to Antifa.
Of course.
There was this woman who was profiled as Antifa's secret weapon, and she went on to work for the SPLC. She was clearly, and Wired has this big interview with her where they say, oh yeah, she's getting information from Antifa and going to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she's like a go-between between these people. So no, there is, and of course the SPLC says we put the Black Panthers, the new Black Panther Party. That's like the one thing on the left that they do include on there. But they don't have anyone who's been perpetrating the violence, the political violence we've been seeing from the left for years. And I think Alan's point also is very well made. I would say that the reason why the left, the left takes some of the Christian heritage and then weaponizes it, and you have these secular gospels. Like transgender ideology is a secular replacement for the gospel that says like, oh, if you think there's something wrong with you, the solution is to change your body to make it echo that of the opposite sex. And there's like this real religious aspect to it that I don't think gets discussed enough. But the left, because they're trying to immanentize the eschaton, because they're secular, they want to bring about heaven on earth now. And this is the problem with Marxism that we've seen over and over again, is that if you don't believe that there's a God in heaven who is ultimately going to judge us, and therefore our earthly justice system doesn't have to achieve perfection yesterday, but we can trust that God will ultimately judge, that creates a release valve that is just not there when you buy a secular ideology. And then you say, we have to enforce all of justice now, yesterday. And that's a recipe for totalitarianism. So that's not to say that everybody on the left is totalitarian, but the ideological roots are there. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that when you reject our heritage, and by the way, I find a lot of good allies among Jews, among Mormons, among non-Christian people who nonetheless believe the sort of traditional values that we all espouse. And I think it's important that we ally with them. And while I take your point, Brian, that ultimately, Christianity is the bedrock on which we're built, I also want to come alongside people who agree with us, because ultimately I don't think that, we all want to have, well, and this is another discussion for another time. But America needs to champion the things that make us strong as a country. And those go beyond, even though they're rooted in Christian values, they work alongside those who don't worship the same way that we do. And I think the line between woke and based goes through the heart of every denomination. And we have to be focused on combating the left and these noxious ideologies more than we are on enforcing our own version of orthodoxy.
Sure. No, it's an interesting point you make about immanentizing the eschaton, and the heaven that they're trying to bring to earth is actually hell. And their form of justice that you speak of is the exact opposite, right? It's very interesting. A very good point. I had not thought about that. Well, Tyler, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on X, is the platform I'm most active on, Tyler2 O'Neill. My first book, Making Hate Pay, The Corruption of the Southern Poverty Law Center, was published in 2020, was updated just last week. So if you buy that, you will be up to speed. And then I also have The Woktopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government, which explains how far-left activist groups like the SPLC wreaked havoc in the Biden administration and pushed the engine of bureaucracy to go against conservatives.
Amazing. Thank you. Alan, how about you? Where do we find you, sir?
Well, my website is www.alanmendenhall.com. I've got all kinds of material there, or you could just search on Google and find me, look up my writings. I write a weekly column for 1819 News. It comes out every Monday.
There it is. Are you secretly a boomer? You just www'd your website.
I was born in 1983. 1983, Brian. So I like the way www rolls off the tongue.
You know, so old habits that I'm going to hear an email go off. And it's like, you've got mail. It's like, Alan, come on, man. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much for the incredible conversation. Very thought-provoking, very informative. And I want to continue bringing you guys onto the different aspects. If you guys want to write some op-eds, Alan's already been writing op-eds about the SPLC. Tyler, I would welcome some of that stuff. I had no idea. You're obviously the resident expert on the subject, probably far more than anybody I've ever heard. So any op-eds, and then we've got radio shows. We got all kinds of different things that we can get you guys making the rounds so that I can get my my office in Montgomery, SPLC. Can't wait to light a cigar, victory cigar. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Brad.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this week. And as always, put your trust in God and keep your powder dry.